Welcome to After Deadline, the media podcast. I'm Kathy Fowler.
And I'm Mark Silverstein.
We are former veteran TV news reporters who turned to the dark side and now work as PR and marketing gurus.
Our guest this week is a fellow DMV native. She's originally from Maryland, but now works and lives in Action News in Philadelphia.
Big market.
It's a great TV station. I watched it growing up.
She's an Emmy award-winning journalist with a boatload of experience covering breaking news, including the arrest of Freddie Gray during her time as a reporter in Baltimore at WJZ.
We're excited to welcome Christie Ileto to the show.
Thanks for joining us. So you right now are working at in Philly, but before that you've worked in Huntsville, Alabama, Albuquerque, New Mexico, WJZ. I actually worked there in Baltimore back in the day. So you've
you did? That's great.
I think it was black and white back then. I think all the film cameras.
No, it was
Oprah was there then. I think
it was post Oprah, but trust me, I heard a lot about Oprah. How good everyone's like, what? Everyone still told all the Oprah stories.
Richard Scher mentioned Oprah once or twice.
Never. So how is Philly now? You're in Philly. I mean, just tell us a little bit about how the different networks, your experiences at the different networks or the different cities of local television.
Well, Philadelphia to me is kind of like a mix of Baltimore and DC. It has, it's a big city, it's a big city like DC, even though DC is actually small, it's the suburbs that are big. But it has that kind of gritty Baltimore feel where everybody's very proud of their neighborhoods. And if you get their neighborhood wrong, they'll be very quick to call in and tell you, this is not Kensington, this is Port Richmond, or this is Fishtown, and so forth. I really like Philadelphia in the sense that people are really proud of like where they come from here, and they're very passionate about their sports, as you've seen with the Eagles and the Sixers in particular. And there's a lot of news that comes out of here. Obviously local, but national too. I mean, I felt like all of last year, especially heading into the election, and then during the election, we were kind of at the epicenter of the world, at least in the political world, because Joe Biden from Delaware, which is part of our coverage area, we had like protests happening all the time. People were coming up, wanting to stop the count at the convention center. I mean, all eyes were on Philadelphia and Delaware. So I feel like there's a lot of big stories that are big for us, but then become bigger, nationally. And that's really cool that you get the opportunity to tell those stories. But my first job in Alabama, while I did not want to go there, that place holds a very special place in my heart, just because I feel like that's where I grew the most professionally and personally. I had to do one-man banding.
You did it all, huh? Edited, and reported.
Yes.
Yeah. For those people who don't know the media, you're literally lugging around a big camera.
Well, now they do it, but they're just doing it with their iPhone.
Well, now they're doing it with their iPhones. But back in the day, you had a big camera, and then you're even lining up your stand-up. You'll like place something on the tree or whatever, a mark, and then by the tree, and it's insane, right?
It was crazy, and I did it all. I did it for like a little over a year, but I really enjoyed the fact that it took me out of my comfort zone and out of my element, and it allowed me to grow in the sense of working with people that I wouldn't necessarily see myself associating with. And I'm not talking about like coworkers, I'm talking about people that I was covering, because I had never lived outside of the DC area before, with the exception of going to Northwestern. So I just kind of felt like everything that I knew was pretty homogenous. And then I got down here and I was like, I need a passport to come down here. Everybody's talking so differently. So I feel like that was where I grew the most professionally and personally. And also learning how to be on your own, because that was like my first job. I was by myself. And you're working all these like crazy long hours for like no money at all.
You have to look nice.
We all did it. It was great.
It was I can't afford nice clothing, but people
can't afford lunch. What do you mean you can't afford I remember, I think I made $17,000 one of my first jobs.
I made $3.25 an hour. I don't even know what that was salary wise, but I'm like, it's bad.
I think $17,000 was a pay hike. I think actually I got knocked up to
probably
to 17. But you talked about so much there that I really want to jump on the sports teams.
Okay, Philadelphia.
They always had they back at the old days at the Vet, they actually had a court in the building in the
yes,
I
did hear this.
They don't have that at Citizens Bank, right?
Not that I know of. I haven't been told about any court or jail underneath the stadium. I always hear about the stories of how they threw snow at Santa.
I was at the game where they booed the Easter Bunny. The Easter Bunny was supposed to come in on a balloon, a big balloon, and it was too windy, and they just booed the Easter Bunny, which was not as good as booing Santa, but second. Yeah,
I always get a bad rap though, but I don't know. They're kind of growing on me, just because I'm from the DMV. Obviously, like I grew up watching a team that's also in their division that I will not name. But what I do love about covering the Eagles when we do cover them, and I don't cover like sports, but I cover like the fans and all of that, especially on their road leading up to the Super Bowl, was just the fact that when you talk to a lot of the fans, they say, listen, this is part of like our family traditions. Like we would go to church and then we would go to the Vet, or we would go to the link and we would watch the games like every Sunday. Like this was part of our blood and our DNA. Like my grandfather did it, my dad did it, I'm doing it, and I'm now doing it with my son. And you're like, wow, that's really cool, because I just feel like that's not how it is everywhere else.
No, yeah.
You know what I mean?
In Philly is very different. Like DC in the DMV area, I feel like Baltimore and Philly are so much more like, as you said, like cities, and they have a relationship with their reporters and their TV personalities very different than I think the Washington market.
Washington with Vance and
the old crew, but not
George Michael, not as much
anymore. Yeah. Not anymore. But Baltimore.
I grew up watching all those people. I'm like obsessed. J.C. Hayward, Maureen Bunyan.
So who was your idol? Who did you idolize?
Andrea Roan.
Andrea Roan.
I'm just naming people that I watched. Like in the area, I'm trying to think. I would say JC. Oh my God, James Adams was on NBC4. Pat Collins was great.
Oh my gosh.
Jim Vance was really good.
He was amazing. Yes. But you also are working with the legend.
Oh my God, Jim Gardner.
Jim Gardner, who's retiring at the end of this year.
Nobody wants to hear about unhappy things.
We do not speak of it.
I grew up watching Jim Gardner. I watched Larry King. I grew up watching action. I grew up in Wilmington.
Okay.
Which is you just tell people you're from South Philly. You don't tell people. And Larry King, then Jim Gardner, Jim O'Brien, Gary Papa, all the legendary names that were there. I mean, what is it like to be working with such a legendary? I mean, for the ever and ever, it was the #1 newscast in the country, #1 local newscast. I mean, what is it like to work at such an iconic place?
Well, I think just working with him is like working with greatness. You want to dial it up when you have a story that he is the one that's tossing to you. And when I first got to Philadelphia, I think I spent like 1 week working during the day. And then they're like, okay, you're going to night side. And I was like, okay. And that's the shift that Jim works. And so pretty much every night I would share the screen with him in a double box. And it didn't really dawn on me until I kept going out and out, because I wasn't from here, just how special it was to have him say your name and to have him like tossing to your story. And then also, if you needed help with something, he would be very quick to say, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Or, hey, that didn't look so good the last time you did it. Why don't you do it differently? And then when he would compliment you, which his compliments are, they If he gives you a compliment, then it actually means something, because he's not just doling them out.
Yeah.
And I remember I was on, I think this was like my third story of the night, and they sent me to breaking news over by KOP by the mall. I like SEPTA bus had, I don't know, gone off the road because of inclement weather, and it was like in some ravine, and it had passengers on it. And we got up there at like 10, and they said, "You're live at 11." I was like, great, this is where I like live, is breaking news. And we just did this walk and talk. And afterwards, I tossed it back to him, and he was like, "Excellent reporting, Christie." I was like,
oh, he said that on the air?
I was like, did this just happen? I didn't want to smile because there were, it was like a tragedy, but I was like, oh, okay, thanks.
You're like, wow.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And how fast did you get the video file of that?
I know. I was like, can somebody clip that for me? Thanks.
I will be saving that video clip.
It's like that scene, and it's an older movie now at this point, but Broadcast News, where Albert Brooks would wait for, he would see the smile or something on Jack Nicholson's face, who was the main anchor, and he would would revel in it. And he would tell the editor who was playing it back for him, "Don't tell anybody I do this." Yeah. But I mean, Jim, how long has he been at the station? How long has he been there?
I want to say probably over 4 decades, but don't quote me because I don't know the exact.
But you were also, you were at 2 iconic stations in Baltimore. WJZ has just like such history as well. Like, Marty Bass, Don Scott, but before the Al Sanders, Denise Koch, of course.
Kathy Fowler.
She's still there, right?
Yeah, Denise is still there.
Yeah.
Sally
She's
Thorne.
great.
Gosh, who was Al Sanders? Anyway, there. Just like obviously Richard Scher, Oprah. Everybody knows that she got one of her big things there, and then she went on to Chicago from there. But anyway, that you've been. When I remember walking through that door, I just felt the history, and just felt like, wow, I can't believe I'm at this station that so many people are, and they stay for decades. That doesn't happen as much, except at these, I feel like, iconic stations in these particular cities.
Right. Then, because they also have that hallway that has like the whole history, like through the front, that goes back to the newsroom. I also, again, did not know much about WJZ before I got there. But it wasn't until I started working with a lot of the photographers, and they would tell me stories about, Oprah used to work here. There was one photographer who was still there at the time that I was there that said he worked with Oprah, and he would tell me all these stories.
Who was that?
And that was really
who it was.
Wayne.
Yeah, I know. They all tell you like story. They love, and there's nobody who loves stories better than the photogs. They're like, oh my God. They used to tell me stories about when they're like, when you get hungover, there's this oxygen tank and whatever, you can go and get oxygen, and that'll help your hangover. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, we used to do it every Saturday morning. I'm like, okay. Just funny. The stories is like, here
they have all the dirt. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know what's going on with everybody, because they're all working with people in the field, so they know everything.
So how was it picking up and moving from the first job to the second? Each time you got to start over.
I always looked forward to it, because I always knew that like each of those places wasn't my forever place. But it is harder. It is really challenging when you get to a new city and you're like, okay, I have to connections and I have to build a rapport with people. It is challenging, but at the same time, it's a good obstacle to try to overcome, because that's part of your job. Like, information and knowing people is essentially like currency in this field. That's how you get your stories done. So I actually kind of looked forward to it, even though at the same time I was dreading it. It wasn't that challenging.
At what point was it, which job did you get the moving allowance where you go, oh, I don't have to have a U-Haul on this one, right? Did that happen? That's what happened.
I actually think I got it for all of them, surprisingly.
Wow.
The first, actually, and I was going to say the first 3 times my parents moved me, but my parents moved me to Philadelphia before I got married. So yeah, and there's just like always just like a reimbursement.
Mhm.
I was really
Now,
lucky.
let's talk about one of your big stories when you were at WJZ and in Baltimore, and nobody can forget this history in Baltimore, but you were one of the first reporters to really extensively cover the arrest of Freddie Gray. Can you explain a little bit just what that whole experience was? I mean, you sort of like were right there on this front row seat of what was happening, and can you just tell us a little bit about like what that was like?
Sure. So the first, I think it was like the day after it happened, like the actual arrest happened, and he went to shock trauma downtown. I had gotten called in early, and they said, "Could you come in and do the story? We need you to turn it for 5 or 6, and then turn it again later tonight." And I was like, "That's fine." So I met the girl that had the video that everybody saw of him getting handcuffed, and we did an interview, and I spoke to his stepdad, and I thought it was just like, okay, that was it. Like, that's the story. That's it. I mean, also it was happening against the backdrop of at the time, like Eric Garner had happened a couple months earlier, like in the fall of 2014, and then, or like, yeah, the fall of summer, fall. And then the same down in Ferguson, that one had also, with Mike Brown, that had also happened. So I think this was like, we're starting to see kind of like a trend. But I thought like, oh, that's the last story. Like, we're probably not going to cover much about this. And then it was like protest. So that was a Monday. It was like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday protest. I spent like the whole week doing protest. Then the next week, I get a call, come in early right now. These kids are just got out of school. They're all assembling like around Mondawmin Mall. Something's going on, blah, blah, blah. So I come in, the photographer that I normally work with that Monday, on Mondays, we went up there. And I was like, I don't understand what's happening. Like, these kids are just standing around. I'm looking at police on one side of the street. These kids are on the other side. They're kind of like exchanging words, but I didn't know what was happening. I was like, this is really weird. And then in a matter of seconds, it changed so quickly because like you start to see one brick fly across the street, then 5, then 10. And then it was just like they were under siege. And I'm sitting here like, is this really happening? And then my photographer goes, we have a DeGiro. We have to power up. Let's go. Like, we're going on. I was like, okay. And we were on, I think, until about like 1 a.m. I didn't get home until like 2:33. And I think I only used the bathroom once, and I was covered in mace. That's all I remember. Like, I never ate. I used the bathroom at a hospital in East Baltimore before we went to like wherever that church was that was on fire at the very end of the night. But I couldn't believe what was happening. I was like, is this, I'd never seen anything like this before. I was like, I think I'm living like 40 years ago, like with the 1968 riots I heard about and I read about in history books, but never thought that I was gonna live through or witness. And I was just watching all of this unfold, and I just couldn't believe my eyes.
Could you at the time separate or I know in those situations you just get so in the zone that you're doing your job, and did you not really have time to process what was happening until afterward, because it's like live shot, and you can't even think about
You
might be
doing
in
it for
danger.
CBS too. You were doing live shots for CBS. I mean, you were doing
Yeah.
stuff out there.
So then like the following week, it was still like more protests, and I was doing live shots for them too. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have time to really like think about what was happening. I was like, okay, compartmentalize. We have a job to do. We have a story to tell. What are you seeing?
Mm-hmm. Did you feel,
and that was
did you have time to think about, oh crap, I could be in danger? Because at that point when you first went, they didn't know it was a situation. So sometimes news crews will be sent with security guards if you know you're going into a situation that potentially could be dangerous, but you guys didn't know that at that time, right? You're just covering a story. So it's you and your photographer out there.
And it unfolded. I mean, they're throwing cans full of, lit cans, fire, they're rocks. I mean, everything, as you said.
Did you guys get backup, or, or they were like, oh, we need to like protect our crews?
No, what I will say, and I think a lot has changed from that one to 2020, right, with George Floyd. But because that was like a whole other situation, like when you're covering that. But with what happened in Baltimore, at least for me, I think because I had two photographers with me. I had a photographer named Judy and then another one named Eric Scott. I'm sure you remember. Heavy.
Yes, Heavy.
Who I miss a lot. So I had the two of them, and because I had been covering that story every day the week before, the family and the community knew who I was. And I think that played a huge part. I don't want to say in like my protection, but just in the fact that they knew who I was. Like they knew, as some of the residents were saying to the networks and even the journalists that were coming from Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, you're only here for the riot. You're not here for the story.
Right.
Whereas for me, like I had been there from the beginning. So I never felt like I was in danger. And I think that is something that often gets lost now with stories, because you go in and you cover it one day and that's it. Like you don't go back, you do follow-ups. And
but it's also like people don't realize, like when you're in the community, especially the relationship that Baltimore has with their media folks and same with Philly. I think they, there is a relationship, right, between where they see DC and the network people as totally different, and they see you as, kind of an insider that you're, they know you and they trust you because they've seen the reporters where the other media they may not trust as much. So you felt that relationship, I guess. Or
I definitely felt that. There was when we were at Mondalman Mall the second time, and it was windy that day, this officer had sprayed mace into a crowd of like kids. And because of the wind, it hit me. And I was like, I was freaking out because it was like on air and like all this mace went into my eyes. And this guy, which he had just looted the CVS that was on fire at Penn and North. I think that was the intersection. He comes up to me and he was like, "Miss Ileto, do you want some milk?" I do, but I don't know where you got some milk from. So I mean,
it was fresh from the CVS. It was great.
Right. You're right. It was
a little hot. It may have been curdling from the fire, but it was, good way to get the
right. I got a little bit of it out, which you're supposed to do, then flush it out with a little bit more water. And I was like, okay, I'm good to go. Thank you so much. You shouldn't be looting. Thanks.
But it is wild. I remember being pregnant in Baltimore, and and I was in a dangerous kind of situation, and I had people who
Palzinski.
No. But I was just in a bad area, and I was literally on like a street corner, and there's like heroin addicts or whatever, but they like totally took care of me. They knew I was, and I had no fear whatsoever because, it's weird when you have a relationship. It's like, that's why they should have like community policing. And
I wasn't thrilled when I proposed to you and you were wearing your engagement ring and covering some story. And Katie Lahan said, "Let's see the engagement ring on camera now live." I was like,
you're like, now I'm a target.
I was like,
let's not do that. Let's And she forced you to show your engagement ring live.
It's awkward not to.
Covering some not great places.
When you're covering Baltimore news, you go to areas. I mean, what I don't think people realize about reporters is that, just like police officers and EMS and, everyone else is running away and you're running towards the danger and you're getting the story, and reporters are putting their lives at risk to tell the story. And people, I don't think they appreciate that as much as they should. Have you ever felt like there's been a situation when you're really in danger, or, it was a close call, or you were like, I don't really want to be here?
Well, it's hard, and it's really hard because the joke when I used to work at night, because now I am a third anchor for our 4:00 newscast, so I work during the day. And I'm not really on the street like this anymore. But when I used to work at night up until like last fall, the joke among the photographers at night was that I would go to the most dangerous places and be fine, which I'm sure, Mark, you've heard, like Kensington is the epicenter of the heroin epidemic. And that would be like the place that I would always be like, I'm going to go live here. I mean, I was pregnant in drug dens, like talking to drug dealers about the opioid epidemic and opening up, I think it was like safe injection sites. And when my husband found out where I was, he was like, why are you going there with my child? I was like, well, I mean, it's like my job.
I was going to ask that question, but I didn't know if that was a proper question.
I was like, this is my job. This is what I'm doing. He's like, I don't like, aren't you scared? I don't like that. I was like, no, these people know me. I know them. Like, they're fine. They're harmless. They're not going to do anything to me.
Yeah.
Well, you said something really interesting, which is that you live for live. You love breaking news.
I love it.
What is it about breaking news? And, when did you decide that this is a passion?
I think it's just, I tend to do my best work under duress. And for me, that's just, it's calming. I don't know why, but when everything is chaotic around, it's when I become the most calm. And that's when I'm able to, it's like, boom, 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 boom. Here are the facts. Here's what you need to know. We'll update it in our next hit. Next. And it's just easy for me to just spit out what I need to spit out that we know or is confirmed. And there's such an adrenaline rush with that. I don't know what it is, but I really enjoy it.
And what do you enjoy? I mean, do you like just being the person that explains the situation to people, like being the storyteller? Like, what do you love most about journalism? Trying to get people to understand things that, trying to take them and walk in other people's shoes so they maybe have an idea of what someone else's life is like or what someone else's story is like. I mean, what do you love about the storytelling?
Well, so I consider myself a storyteller at the heart. And it's just what you said. It's to get people to think or meet people through my stories, through the lens of what I'm telling them, and see these people that they wouldn't necessarily interact with in a different way. And for example, during election week, we also had an officer-involved shooting in West Philadelphia that ended up becoming like a national story. This guy named Walter Wallace. And I was sent out there and I turned a story like for that night. And one of the neighbors who like didn't really want to go on camera, but I said, listen, like, you don't have to face the camera. He's going to see I'm back here. I've got like the mic tucked underneath my arm and we're just talking. It's like a wide shot. And the bite that she said to me that stuck out to me most was he was on, he had a mental episode and his mom was trying to stop the police from firing the multiple rounds of shots at him that killed him. And people always are like, why are you out here protesting? This is why we're out here protesting. Because if it had been somebody else that didn't look like her, who also looks like me, maybe the outcome would have been different. And out of all of the bites that she said, I was like, that actually, I feel like somebody sitting in Bucks County or Norristown or Chester County,
Montgomery County,
maybe they could like understand that. Just that one little sentence that she said, if this person didn't look like me, maybe he would still be alive. And this is why we're out here protesting all the time.
So do you think you're making a difference?
I don't know if I am, but I hope that I am.
Is that what drives you? Because it's so hard, the media climate. I mean, it's so much harder than when we were in the media now with fake news and, and probably
social
and then social, you're more likely to be, attacked on social media, just like people, mean tweeters and mean whatever, people on the website, the comment section of any website. It's got to be hard. I don't think people realize how hard the profession has gotten. to tell the story? Would you say it's changed over the last decade?
Well, what I think has changed a lot is that, which I love cell phones and I'm all about like social media. I think that has allowed people to become citizen journalists, and they can just spit all of this stuff out that may or may not be true, and there's no repercussions. Whereas if I just spit something out that wasn't true, there would be repercussions for me.
You'd be fired, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times you just see people put things out and you're like, did that really happen? So I don't know. That's the thing that's been the most frustrating for me. But I don't really pay attention to what people say. I don't get a lot of crazy tweets to myself, but I did during the George Floyd riots in Philadelphia by a couple people, but was it?
But do you have to, like, a lot of stations have digital first. They have signs up in their newsrooms. You got to get the stuff online before you go live. Is there pressure to have a great social media following, to be posting? Does that impact what you're doing, or it's more important?
So I think maybe because I would say that social media is like part of my generation or my culture. It's a lot easier. Like, I think it's like fun. So for me, like today there was a mall shooting at KOP. It was initially came out as a mall shooting. It wasn't.
Well, let me translate that for Kathy. King of Prussia Mall. It's the second largest mall in the country, right? Isn't it?
Sorry, yeah, second largest behind Mall of America.
Behind Mall of America.
Yeah. This woman
Philly guys, we know that KOP is King of Prussia. Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
This woman got into a fight with somebody in front of five guys and like pulled out her gun. It's not funny, but like that's what happened. So for me, if I were covering that, the first thing I'd be doing going there would be like, what do we know so far? And I would tweet like breaking. This is like police say X, Y, and Z at 6 ABC. And then because that's just what I would do. Like, not that that's like fun to do, but that's the first thing I think of is to get the information.
Do you let people know that you're heading there? Like heading there
now,
well, follow me at 6, we'll have details or whatever.
Yeah. It'll be like updates at 4, updates at 6.
So she ordered the spicy fries and got the regular fries. Is that what happened?
So I don't know what happened. I wasn't on that story, but I was just thinking about a breaking news story, which I couldn't believe. Because at first it came out as like shots fired, active shooter at KOP. We were all like, what is happening? But then this guy had.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
One of the things I keep hearing about in Philly is everybody's got a gun now. I mean, that's a quote. Everybody's got a gun. Is it? I mean,
it's happening. It's happening everywhere. Like people say, "Oh, you can't. Like you're in Center City. That's where we live. That's a good area." And I'm like, I mean, it is, but I mean, people from Kensington who are suffering from the opioid epidemic, my daughter sees them at the playground all the time in Center City. Or there's like shootings down the street, like because we're like really close to Rittenhouse, which is another neighborhood, and there'll be shootings there. They just get more coverage because they typically don't happen there.
Right. How does it that moment? You have a child now. So how old is she?
She's 2.
She's 2. I remember like at some point, I mean, kid stories, any stories about kids are hard. And then after you have kids there, after a while, I was like, I'm going to become a medical reporter. I can't deal with some of these, because some of the stories, like it literally rips your heart out and you're like trying to figure out how am I going to cover this and not like cry. Because it's so hard to tell some of these stories. Like it literally breaks your heart.
I think the hardest, I'm actually pretty good at compartmentalizing. She has made me a little weaker, but I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at
on a lot of levels. Yeah.
I'll never forget. I was actually having this conversation with one of our EPs today. There was a story last April This guy had gotten shot to death outside in Old City, another neighborhood, and they were going to send us there. And I was like, okay, it's a one guy shot. Like, we go for, quadruple shootings, quintuple shootings. We don't go for like single shootings. Like, why are we going to this? They're like, it's an Old City. It happened across the street from, I think it was the Revolution War Museum, next to one of those outdoor dining like setups. So there were all these pedestrians and tourists. And I think they fired like 24 shots at him in a drive-by. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So we went, and I'll never forget, it was April 5th. I had dropped my daughter off to daycare that morning and cried 2 hours, like cried 5 times in 2 hours. When we get there, I'm separated from my photographer because I always feel like people won't talk to me if I'm like super close to him. But I always try to get away. If I have to shoot on my phone, I will. I have my microphone like tucked underneath me. And I was like, hey, Albert, I think this is the family because there's like 5 people or 6 people that just jumped out of this car and they're like running down here and they look really frantic. And I was like, they're coming up on your right. Like they're 2 seconds out from you. So he turns the camera and because he's by the tape, they like lose it. This mom is screaming, rightfully so. Like she's just finding out that her son has been murdered. And the sound of that and just watching that whole moment really like hit me because I was thinking, I cried 5 times in 2 hours for somebody that I know I'm going to see when I come home. This mother is never going to see her child, whether or not he's about that life or the intended target. She will never see him. And that moment, I was like, I need to go. I need a second. I was like, I need a second in the live truck while we frantically cut this piece for 11. And I'll be ready to go in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's hard. It can take a toll,
or days later, it can, it can still reverberate.
Well, half the time, because most of the time you're not, like you said, you can't process it in real time because you'd never be able to do your job if you had to process all the bad things, stories you had to tell. Right.
Right.
So, it's like later you think about it. So I used to always think about it at the end of my day on the drive home and I'd be like, oh, wow, that's when it would kind of hit me what I just had watched throughout the day.
They still pop up in my head every once in a while, some of the bad ones. But on a better note, where's the ultimate goal? Network? What talk show?
I don't think it would be a good talk.
You said you're anchoring now, right? You're the anchor at 4.
Yeah, so they have the 4 and the 5. They have like 3 anchors. They have like the 2 at the desk, and then like somebody that pops in and out. I pop in and out at 4. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think like when I was growing up, the ultimate goal when I was a kid was, I want to work at WRC because that's just what I would watch all the time. Now I think it's changed a little bit, and it's just really, I'm really happy where I am, but I'm also know like I would never turn down a great opportunity either. So it's just about if something, something that I couldn't resist came my way, then I would definitely be open to it. I'm really happy where I am.
All right. And the final, can I ask if you have one more? Oh, the final question, the big question. This is it really what gets to the core of everything. Best cheesesteak?
Oh, De Alessandro's.
Okay. That was easy.
De Alessandro's for sure. Did you know that Jim's burned down?
Yeah, it was national news. My family, when we were texting each other, we were like in mourning.
They're really good too.
Yeah.
I felt very bad for them, but I think they're going to be able to
rebuilding, right? Or they're going to reopen. Yeah.
But I just love De Alessandro's. I don't know why. I think it's because they cut their meat. It's like grounded. It's so fine. There's always a line. I mean, there's always a line everywhere. Larry's, I've heard, is really good. I've never eaten there. I won't cheat on De Alessandro's.
Have you been to Termini Brothers for the cannoli?
Oh yeah, they send stuff all the time for Easter. Alicia Vitarelli does stuff with them all the time.
Yeah, no, that place is good.
Very
you gotta go to Termini. Tell him I say hi. Tell John Morris I say hi.
Oh, you know John Morris.
Worked with John Morris in Columbus.
He's great.
He's what is he? Executive vice president? What's his title?
He's something like that. He's a big He's upstairs now.
Yeah, he's got his own office and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a corner office. That is true.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing some of the behind the scenes stories and, what it's like to be a journalist, whether it's in the anchor chair on the mean streets of Baltimore, Philly, or in Alabama.
They are the mean streets, and good. I love her dedication to it, or that she loves doing this. You could just get the excitement off of it. It's really fun to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me and for thinking of me. I really appreciate it.
You got it. I mean, she, serious topics, but the angles that she brings to it, the love of the breaking news, going live, and that she was covering the protest and she only went to the bathroom once. I mean, the things you remember, it's really interesting.
Well, also people don't realize when you're out there doing all those live shots, half the time there is no bathroom and there's no place to go.
That's exactly, that was the moment I decided to get out of the business.
And when you're like trying to,
when the photographer in a live truck handed me a cup.
Yeah.
He said,
you're like, it's come to this.
It was, I was covering something on Capitol Hill once, and it was early in the morning, and I was drinking a lot of coffee, which didn't matter when it was dark, but when the sun came up, you can't, pick a tree at the Capitol Hill.
It gets a little bit harder. Well, we hope you enjoyed this week's episode. After Deadline, the media podcast is a production of On the Marc Media. If you enjoyed what you heard today and want to hear more of our interviews with incredible journalists across the country and around the world, actually, be sure to follow us on social media at On the Marc Media and subscribe to After Deadline wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Until next time, we'll catch up to you after Deadline.